Welcome, everyone. Great to have you here. So before we kick off looking at what independent ad tech can fix, let's have a quick, brief introductions from you all. Dom, let's start with you.
I'm Dom Joseph, CEO of Captify. We're the largest holder of search data outside of Google, and we power media and insights.
Hi, I'm Ari Paparo, the CEO of Beeswax. We innovated the Bidder as a service, a highly flexible bidding platform that people use to basically create their own trading desk or DSP.
Great.
Where's the Twitter wall? Oh, we got the Twitter wall.
Oh, yeah, it's back.
Sir Martin didn't get the Twitter wall, but we get abused.
There's probably a good reason for that, yeah.
And I'm Maria Flores. I'm a general manager for Amobis. We're one of the largest independent Adtech players in the market.
Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Fitzpatrick. Been doing this for about 20 years, working mostly for Sir Martin, not for Marty, we can call him, with Zaxxas Mediacom. My last proper job before this one was with Adapt TV, which was sold to AOL back in 2013. And now I'm working for IPON Web as general manager for Europe.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. So interesting conversation to follow on from Sir Martin. Let's kick off on a positive note. Is our industry crumbling? I think it's a fair question. I mean, so you've obviously got the big topic that will be a big topic of today is the death or potential death of a third-party cookie. Yes. Beyond that, you've got just general day-to-day challenges and threats that exist for publishers and advertisers and everything in between that the cookie, rather inconsiderately doesn't even take into account when people are trying to do their day-to-day jobs. Kind of what are the biggest threats at the moment? And is it a kind of global crisis, the future of the third-party cookie? I'll go down the line. Dom, let's start with you. Your views.
Yeah. Well, obviously we're a data business, so we're heavily involved with the cookie, but I think everybody is, and this is certainly an industry-wide situation. It's a conundrum. We've got privacy, we've got Google. We had to choose whether it's about competition or whether it's about privacy in the Google discussion. I think that we haven't helped ourselves as an industry with the GDPR methodology and the way that we've handled it, the different interpretations that we've all had. But do I think the industry is crumbling? Absolutely not. I mean, we've still got plenty of different ways that we iterate as an industry. We can't be written off as businesses because we have a habit of evolving very, very quickly. We build technology, we've got some of the best talent in the industry, and there's still plenty of ways for us to keep moving forward.
Very positive. Ari.
Yeah, excuse me. Zooming out, advertising's still growing. Programmatic as a proportion of advertising is growing rapidly. Programmatic is effectively eating advertising. The television world is going to flip to programmatic over the next, 1 year, 10 years, it's unclear, but it's an enormous growth opportunity. Companies are still being funded. We raised a B round earlier this year. Not as many, and not as many and not as frothily, but companies are being funded. Innovation is still happening. So yeah, the cookie's going away. There's a lot of other things going on.
Brilliant. Maria?
Yeah, I'm an optimist, so I actually think this is a very exciting moment for the industry. We're going to go through a very severe period of change, and I think consolidation maybe from old world and new world, sort of like philosophies. But yeah, I mean, there's new things, that are going to be more important, like first-party data and second-party data and new ways of identity and so on and so on. But because of that, there's a lot of opportunities. So no, I don't think we're crumbling. Yeah.
That's good. Brian?
It might feel like the industry is crumbling, but actually probably a better way to put it would be that it's evolving. We're going through these changes, so cookies going away will be replaced by something else. We'll still be able to target. It's just not going to be done in that way. It's going to be done in different ways. I think we're going to see AI and machine learning starting to play a lot more bigger role in what has been a very manual process. If you look back over the last 10 years, anyone who remembers, we were sending faxes to do insertion orders. That's where we were, and we look at where we are now.
As the video highlighted earlier, I'm not sure if you saw the 10 years of ATS video, it was back in 2011, 12, even later than that, we were still using fax machines.
That was people desperately trying to hold on to save the fax machine. We're not there now, we've moved on. I heard recently that data is now more valuable as a commodity, it's more valuable than oil. So we're certainly in the right place, and while there are changes going on, those who can affect those changes and make differences are the ones who are going to succeed.
Brilliant. So, I mean, Sir Martin just there talked about the fact that in his view, advertisers are almost the most opportunistic they've ever been. They're really trying new things. They're trying to be experimental. They're trying to innovate. I mean, Ari's come to you as a company that works with those kinds of advertisers that are looking to push the envelope, if you like, into what is possible in terms of programmatic, and kind of, looking at some customizable sort of bidder perspective. Are you seeing this? Because others might say that they're actually becoming more aware, more wary, trying to be more brand safe and kind of not actually testing what could be possible out there. Are you actually seeing agreeing with what Sir Martin said?
Yeah, absolutely. I think advertisers are looking at programmatic and saying this isn't just a niche part of our media business. This is starting to become our entire way of reaching customers with paid media. And so they have to take it seriously. And taking it seriously in many cases means in-housing. I firmly agree with Sir Martin that in-housing is rampant. It's much more so in the U.S. than in Europe. But in the U.S., it's absolutely across the board. And when you're in-housing, you start asking yourself questions like, why am I spending the money in the way I am, and how do I measure it? So you have advertisers leaning in heavily to more sophisticated techniques around attribution, incrementality, raw data analysis, machine learning where it's appropriate, and trying to really understand it. Because once you in-house and you use a platform that's transparent, you suddenly see everything, and that's a blessing and a curse, right? Maybe it's too much. You start saying, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" But the insights come out of that, and so do the sort of innovative techniques.
Interesting. And Brian, from the perspective of IPONWeb, the biggest ad tech company that no one's ever heard of, it certainly was that way, 5 years ago, even maybe sooner than that. And it feels like it's coming out of that way. And there's people. And this room's a bad example because everyone knows who IPONWeb is anyway. But where do you see the IPONWeb business is evolving, and the conversations and relationships that you're having with agencies, with advertisers, and the tech that you guys are building for them? Are you seeing that envelope being pushed as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we need to be the most front-facing company in the world.
No.
We follow our CEOs, most companies do, and Boris is a very clever guy who has the ability, understatement, and who has the ability to guide and direct the industry. He takes a very big responsibility over how this industry moves forward. And so what we're seeing a lot more of is not necessarily in-housing, but working with companies to see what is it that they want to do. As you mentioned, it used to be a very small part, programmatic used to be a very small part of the business. Now it's 50, 60, 70% of the business. What are they going to do now? They're going to keep on paying 30, 40% fees when there's that much of their business going through for what is essentially technology there. Mm. So going in there and looking at businesses holistically, figuring out how an industry needs to work, how a company needs to work, buyers, sellers, that's what we do at IPONWeb, to try and figure out what are the macro trends and then work down to see how we actually can fix those.
If I could add to that, it's not that dissimilar to the way paid search happened, where paid search started out as interesting, effective, use an agency, start spending more and more money, and then very quickly most marketers, where it was an important part of their business, said, I need to own the vendor relationship, I need to own the data, I may need to own the strategy. There's still agencies, of course, but it's for a major retailer, paid search has become a core thing of what they do. It's part of the marketing department's job. It's not an exceptional thing that happens to be part of their capabilities.
Interesting. And you mentioned paid search. That's a great segue to coming on to you, Dom. Kind of how are you continuing to innovate with paid search, and how it kind of drives your business forwards?
Yeah, we don't do paid search, but we use search data.
Yeah.
So, I think that the way you can use search data and data sets like that has completely evolved. I think you can break it right down. The insights are incredibly powerful, looking at it down to a consumer level, down to all the connections that they make and brands and trends and products. And I think that's probably the thing that's changed the most about how we as companies use data over the last few years. It's no longer about just putting segments into a DSP and then running against blind data. You need to actually understand what's within it. So the use case of what you do with that data has evolved, and obviously you can now power a much wider range of media. But I think the thing that's changing at the moment is actually the input of how data is going in is changing. So one of the biggest trends that we're seeing at the moment is the rise of voice, and voice being the new way that consumers are controlling machines. And that's panning out to be basically a device war between Google and Amazon as they try and get control of the user and all this new data that's coming in, because the voice mechanism is now the new search engine, and Amazon and Google clearly are in a huge race to get to the front of that. So the way that consumers are providing the data is changing, as well as what you do with it. But
that then begs the question, and going off on a tangent here slightly, but looking at the future third-party cookie and the reasons why the cookie is not a safe way to be tracking and targeting people, when will that start coming into the conversation around how voice data is being used?
Well, I think it's quite a way away because at the moment the voice data is only being controlled by first-party players.
So you could just have a party until then and just make
No,
most
the
of
opposite.
it.
We're actually trying to stop those guys having all the control of that data. So, I mean, going back to the third-party cookie point, the main thing that's going to sort out, the death of the third-party cookie will actually, in the end, be a good thing because it's going to sort out all of the endless arbitrage of data that adds no value and it just getting abused in a way where you don't really have a relationship with the publisher or let alone the consumer. So I think over the next few years we're going to evolve so that companies that are providing value in this chain have got to have a closer relationship with the source of that information, whether it's the publisher or the consumer, so first-party relationships, and that's clearly going to happen. So to Brian's point about, will it mean that you can't do an individual user level or targeted campaign? No, it's just going to evolve to something that's a little bit truer. And voice, I think it's so early, and at the moment Google and Amazon have got complete control of this sector. What we're trying to do is provide technology so that content owners can actually enable consumers to search with their voice or engage or navigate with their voice rather than having to go through Amazon Alexa.
Interesting. Okay. Maria, I want to come to you now. Amobis has gone through quite a few changes in the past 12 months. There's been some big deals, there's been some big moves. Kind of how's the past 12 months been for you as a business, and what are the big trends you're seeing now from a channel innovation perspective?
So last year I would say has been transformative. I'm actually quite recent at Amobis myself, so I've been seeing it from both the sidelines.
So you are part of the transformation?
I'm part of the transition, yes. And a lot of the focus that you may have seen, so like on the press, has been more around, again, merging this traditional world with this new world as well. So there's been a lot of focus around helping marketeers plan and buy audiences across both sort of like the traditional TV and digital media, which is quite tricky because you need to bring an upfront mentality to a real-time one. But I think that's quite related to some of the change that we're going right now. I think Dominic was saying, probably this one-to-one addressability pipe dream that we all had needs to change when the cookie dies. So it has allowed us to be part of a lot of advertising decisions, not just programmatic, but advertising, and be able to have a much better understanding of what that means for the consumer as well. And obviously, that was your question, sorry.
Essentially.
So I think, again, we had to think quite hard because of all of these on identity and figuring out new ways to actually understand consumers and households at the same time. So I think that has been extremely positive for us and hopefully for our clients too.
And what about kind of channels like connected TV? Kind of how is that? What journey is Amobis on through that? And how is the consumption around TV changing how you guys are working with your clients?
Yeah, we're definitely very active on that. I think we launched a connected TV data marketplace only last month in the US. And that has required an extremely amount of work because it's still such a fragmented, piece of work, so to speak. So putting together a lot of pieces of data. But that's, a lot of where audiences are moving and advertising is moving as well. So that's important. But again, trying to offer that consolidated view of the consumer behavior across the entire funnel, that's what we're really trying to focus on. And that involves really tapping on new places of inventory, whether it's connected TV or out of home or voice and so on and so on.
Ari, looking from the US to Europe and connected TV and the journey it's on, obviously very, very different markets. And Europe in and of itself is a ton of different markets altogether. How are you seeing CTV grow and what conversations are you having with your clients and what, I guess, lessons or learnings can be brought over from the UK, from the US to Europe?
Right. Well, they are really different markets. I think in the U.S., because there's been the traditional TV business has been very consumer hostile with very high rates and inability to choose bundles, et cetera. In the U.S., connected TV is growing very rapidly. Where at the average household, I think the average household has a connected TV at this point. Probably some have 2, some have 0, and the market is the advertisers are kind of starved for those high quality audio on video impressions in the living room. In Europe, I think it's a pretty different dynamic where it's actually been more innovative on the consumer front with TV historically. So it's less of a overwhelming push of Apple TVs, Roku's, and other devices, even though it's still happening. Also, I think that every market, every geographic market in Europe is much more consolidated in terms of the number of sellers of video impressions to begin with. So it's more likely than not that will continue, and the incumbents will have less of an ability to kind of break through through and make a lot of availability of inventory. The one last point, which is connected TV, the hardest problem in connected TV is data. The data is very messy, so understanding who you're actually reaching and whether they converted or performed is particularly difficult. And the U.S. Is kind of the secret is everyone's using IP addresses to do everything, and because it's sort of like this gray area of privacy, whereas in Europe, IP address is firmly personal data.
Yeah.
So there's a big technical difference, where in the U.S. we could get away with stuff as long as we have a sort of a fascist government, whereas in Europe they're a little more consumer oriented.
But I mean, for now though, like that could easily not be the case in a few years' time,
Indeed.
and then you have to start again. Or then Europe's teaching the US
You're already
lessons.
planning for that, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Brian, I want to understand from your perspective, obviously we talk about GAFA, which is Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple quite a lot, and you know how they are these just giant behemoths kind of moving and just sort of dominating everything in their wake. It does kind of beg the question as to whether companies like you have to work much harder to be able to survive in this industry, and it's almost like you're on the front line just trying to kind of stave off any challenges along the way. How do you think where do you think innovation lies for these kind of smaller independent companies to be able to continue to innovate against the GAFAs of the world?
Yeah, I think there's actually a benefit of not being a GAFA. So when we've been into some pitches recently and come out quite successful because we're not one of the big companies. We're coming in there saying you'll own all your data, you'll be able to control, you pay us for the technology that brings it all together, and then it's yours. And I think that's a big, big advantage. The idea of owning your own technology, having control over your own technology is massive. We've come up in a world where these companies have come along, they've become so successful that they're now starting to become too successful. They believe they can win everything, they've got so much control. There's not enough room for smaller companies to come in there and innovate. We're just a blanket layer. We kind of sit across the whole thing.
Yeah.
But what you want is you want a healthy marketplace for companies to come up, to be able to innovate, to be able to do the things that will help to change the industry, and not have these big companies where their main focus, their main drive is just to hold their position and then control everything. That's not a good place for anyone to be, and that wasn't where the internet was started off and invented. And with regards to the next big area of where there's a big fight coming on, I think it's within TV, where you've got the big TV companies who have seen Netflix, they've seen Amazon Prime, they realize that they're the ones who are commissioning a lot of the programs being made, and they're terrified. What do we do? Do we just jump onto the carousel that is the GAFAs because we have to? And what we're starting to see, I think, is a real pushback, where they know what happens. When Google comes in and starts running your ad business, they will take until you're the value creator, as in the content producer, or you're the distributor with the relationship with the customers, and they'll take all that value and you'll be left on the sidelines and commoditized. And I think that's something that is really, really interesting within the TV area at the moment, where they're starting to band together. We're seeing some interesting things happening in Europe in particular, where they're starting to come together to have their own technology that is Google free. And that's something I think that's very, very interesting to see how that will play out. Otherwise, we just end up in a 1984 type world where you've got 3 or 4 American companies that come in and run everything, and then 2 Chinese companies that come through and they look after the rest. And that would be a real shame. So governments breaking up companies, I don't know if that's the way forward. I think people need to take more responsibility for what they're doing, where their information is going, where their data is going. That's the bit that's missing. There's ID5 here and Factor, 2 companies who have done a really good job of giving a platform for people to be able to go somewhere to managing their own data and understanding their digital identity. And that's something that I think is that we really need to look at, is people doing that rather than just giving it away to third-party companies who will just take it and do whatever they want with it.
I agree to that, and I think the flip side of doing business in Europe was we cannot use IP addresses, which makes everything a lot more complex and frankly expensive. Is that there's a lot more desire for control away from those big players, right? And you see that definitely in the broadcaster consortiums, and that's kind of like one of the areas where we invested heavily on for those right reasons. But also in terms of marketeers trying to get that control. If you're a marketeer, you're under pressure. I mean, Adtech is under pressure, but they're under pressure as well. And if you can't have access to the data, if you don't understand what that consumer behavior is across all of your different channels, you're not going to be able to differentiate. It's impossible. And we're seeing a very, very strong trend as well in terms of not only in-housing, but marketeers who are still willing to work with their agencies, but trying to get more transparency and having a much deeper relationship with all of their technology vendors and almost imposing that technology into those agencies because they want to make sure they have that transparency and they have the flexibility to build on their own assets. Otherwise, they just, like everyone knows how to use Facebook optimization or Google tags. But if you want to really be able to leverage the assets of your brand, you need to be able to have technology that gives you that flexibility. Yeah.
Right. I mean, from a marketer's perspective, they're already in a very unpleasant situation where they have to divide their budget into, Facebook, and even if they don't use the Google stack, they need a DV360 to get YouTube, plus Snap, plus Twitter, plus programmatic, and that's unpleasant to say the least because it's very hard to optimize between them. But then when you get to the point where some of those channels are now cutting off your access to raw data, your apples comparisons are almost impossible. And you're having to make decisions about media planning. They're much more akin to the old days where you sort of did statistical models once a month and put a certain amount of budget into this channel, a certain amount into that channel. So access to raw data is the only thing that helps marketers try to overcome those challenges.
But so how do you make the lives of those marketers, advertisers, and publishers as well? How do you make it easier for them where they're not in a world where they can just go, you know what, it is just easier for me to jump to Facebook, jump to Google, because I know what I'm doing. They make it nice and easy for me. It's obvious, versus the kind of complicated world we live in where it feels like there's lots of side conversations and whispering going on, and Adtech believe one thing and advertisers believe another thing, and there's no sort of level playing field in terms of those conversations are the same. And then there's a lot of eye rolling with Adtech if advertisers don't understand something and vice versa. Whereas Google just just literally plug it in and we can have it live in 15 minutes. How can independent ad tech help those advertisers not keep running back to Google and Facebook, Dom?
By doing all the things that they don't do, which is plenty of things. I think no marketer wants to just spend their money with Amazon, Google, and Facebook. And Amazon's going to be one to watch over the next few years as that gets more and more interesting with their play in TV, mixing it with transaction data and retail. But they're certainly not there yet. Google have, and I don't want to talk too much about other companies, but they're not exactly known for phenomenal customer service and having great butlers. But also, there's plenty of things that Google don't even do, with their search data and with their other assets, And I think that independent players, like all of us on this panel, can do all sorts of things that actually add a lot of value to marketers and to publishers. Ultimately, if you don't add value in this sector, in this industry, you're not going to survive. And I think that's what's happening. The demise of Adtech has actually been falsely presented as actually that Adtech is a screwed industry. Actually, there's quite a few companies that are going to do very well out of it still. As we're seeing, actually, quite a few companies are still doing very well out of it and continue to grow. I think everybody here and still growing and working with more and more brands, working with the biggest brands in the world. So I think that actually we'll find that the sector will continue to grow. It's just got rid of a lot of the waste, all the companies that are just commoditizing and not really adding any value.
And do you think that in the ad tech industry more generally, we've now reached peak consolidation, and it will start backtracking, and there'll start to be more, not fragmentation, but do you see big tech being broken up? Do you see some of the big acquisitions happening actually backtracking, and there start to be kind of more independent, more opportunistic companies?
If I had to, on the government side, if I had to guess, the best case scenario would be something like what Europe did to Microsoft with the browsers, where forced interoperability, where Google could be told, you have to let other people bid on YouTube. It's just not fair the way you're doing it. That would be the best case scenario and probably also the fairest thing to do. So that's just my 2 cents on that subject.
Brian, what's your thoughts on breaking up big tech?
I think breaking up companies is going to be difficult. You see what Google did with Alphabet. They essentially broke up the company themselves, just kept it under one holding group. So when they are told to break up, it's easily done. I think your point is correct. It's not about breaking up a company. It's about having a level playing field where everybody can have a fair chance of being successful. If you look at the anomaly that is Facebook, 15, 20 years ago, you couldn't buy user-generated content. It was just, no, stay away from that. Nobody knows what it is. Facebook is user-generated content. And they've managed to turn inventory that could not be sold into some of the most valuable inventory there is, just because they can target it correctly. But you still don't know where you're going on. And we're missing out on one of the biggest changes that's happened since I've been doing this is brand association. You used to want to have your product beside that brand because that would have to build your brand. The ability to brand build these days is very, very tough. because everything is so fragmented and people are just scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or just looking at nothing, waiting for something exciting to happen, which usually doesn't, rather than going on actually being intellectually stimulated by reading an article or by watching a TV program that actually challenges you. It's too much about entertainment and not about the media that we consume, that we advertise beside. It's too much about just entertaining and holding your attention rather than stimulating a debate or stimulating an argument. So it's no wonder where we are when it comes to the leaders that we have, because they're popular rather than challenging.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think that this big tech conversation that we frequently have, do you think those big tech companies will start slowing down just because they've got too much heft and too much baggage to them, and that gives the opportunity for the smaller, more agile players to take over? Ari, you're sort of nodding along.
Sure, I'll go for that one. Well, one thing that's happened because of the scrutiny around the companies is that M&A has stopped.
Yeah.
Right. So traditionally, Facebook used M&A to get into new markets when their popularity started increasing. Google has done sort of a vertical integration play with buying Adtech, buying all these things. There's been no M&A for years, and there probably won't be, because as soon as they stepped up, like if Facebook bought TikTok, the government would freak out and it would probably be stopped. So that's an interesting longer-term opportunity, because as new media develop or new techniques develop in ad tech or in media, it's going to be much more difficult for them to compete except by internally building. And Facebook has a great reputation of copying people effectively. Google does not. Google's generally not been able to innovate internally. So if you zoom out on that picture over the course of 5 or 10 years, they may have a significant inability to innovate based on their government scrutiny.
Interesting. And I don't want to touch too much on the topic because we've got a whole panel on it later, but we do have to talk a bit more about identity and, whatever the future of the third-party cookie looks like, how your businesses are readying yourselves for that world. Dom.
Relationship with the first party. So
right, it's all about the first party.
Yeah, with the consumer and with publishers directly. And 15 years ago, I used to work at Media Corporation, and we used to have gambling.com, and gambling.com unceremoniously one day got deleted from Google, having been number one on Google for many years, and the entire business was wiped out. So from day one, we are petrified of being in any way reliant on Google.
So you've always lived in this fearful world, thinking it could happen again.
Absolutely, yeah absolutely.
Right place to be, probably.
But yeah, first party, and the thing is, Google and Facebook and these companies, they're huge access points to consumers, but we should remind ourselves that consumers are doing an awful lot of things outside of those areas. There is, we've taken 40 billion searches a month. Google's about 110. If they're including all of their voice, which isn't really exploratory searches. So there's an awful lot of activity that's going on out there, as Amazon have shown with their rise, with their intent data. So there's plenty of areas for us as an industry to still attack and also do a better job at those big guys in the areas they are also in.
And Ari, the death of the third-party cookie doesn't necessarily preclude third-party data. So what is the future of third-party data?
Right.
Will Beeswax still be able to plug into those data sources alongside first-party data?
Our philosophy is generally to be an agnostic platform. So I think a lot of other DSPs kind of got into their minds that they had to own identity, or that they were going to kind of add value to their buyers in various ways, which was fine strategy. But our point of view is that we're a tech platform. We don't make money on data at all. We pass through the costs, and we're also going to be agnostic as to the source of data. So if a customer wants to transact using the LiveRamp ID, we'll do that. If they want to transact using their own ID, maybe at some point we'll adopt a third-party DSP's cookie if it's more widespread than ours. We're not going to have what's sometimes called the strategy tax, where we have a strategy that goes against our customers' needs. Whatever you've got, we'll transact on it.
Right. Interesting. Fair enough.
Yeah, and I think that's somewhat aligned with us as well. We do have some proprietary data through kind of like our parent company, through Synctel, and we've been also kind of like building our own frameworks as well. But ultimately, you will need to be flexible, and a lot of our clients will use first-party data and second-party data. We're also helping many of them connect with each other to be able to leverage each other's assets. And we also believe that panel data could have some value as well in some respects, right? That again, we don't need to target a one-to-one addressability necessarily, but flexibility will be key, and partnership will be key, definitely.
Interesting. And Brian, how are you advising clients? Is context the future? Is it panel-based? Or is there an argument that we can still muddle along with in the way we are doing?
We would never advise that. Muddle along.
Of course not, no.
I think we're going to see huge innovation on the back of this. something that's really starting to gain some ground is using artificial intelligence and planners to be able to work together, to be able to come up with strategies, to be able to adapt those strategies. There are things that people are very good at, coming up with ideas, understanding, that side of things. Then there's things that machines are very good at, which is doing things over and over and over again, very rapidly, and testing, learning. And our R&D department are working very diligently in this area to be able to bring the two together. So you're actually training AIs with people and machines working together to be able to come up with results that we can replicate, try something else, move along. So yeah, cookies, it's not great, but we will see innovation coming on the back of this because we have to.
Excellent. That's a great note to end this panel on. It shows us lots of positivity, and hopefully that will be bookmarked throughout the day as well. So thank you very much, and so thank you to Dom, Ari, Maria, and Brian. A round of applause. Thank you.